Now we've got Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, who's running against Rick Scott for the U.S. Senate in Florida. So first off, we have two pieces of bombshell news out of that state. The first is that a 15-week abortion ban was upheld in the court, meaning that the 6-week ban will now go into effect in about 30 days. And the second is that abortion rights will officially be on the ballot in Florida in November. So let's go bad news first. What kind of an impact will this draconian 6-week abortion ban have on the women of that state?
Yeah, I'm extremely concerned. This is one of the most extreme bans on abortion, a 6-week abortion ban at a time where most women don't know that they're pregnant, without hardly any exceptions to rape and incest. This is affecting tens of thousands of women, not only here in our state, Brian, but also in the Southeast region that have been using Florida as their last state of resort to make sure that they have access to this critical reproductive health care. This is going to affect our health. It's also going to affect mortality rates, particularly for Black women who will not be able to have access to health care. But the good news is that, yes, the Supreme Court actually listened to over 1 million Floridians from all sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, independents, who signed on to make sure that the government doesn't interfere in the decisions that are private for a woman between herself, her family, her doctor, and her faith. And so I'm expecting millions of people to come out in November to vote to make sure that we enshrine abortion access into our state's constitution. But it will mean nothing if they send Rick Scott back to the Senate, because let me just say, this is a man that agrees, that he said that he would have proudly supported a 6-week abortion ban, is pushing for a national abortion ban, and he will do that if he goes back to the Senate. That is why my race now is more critical than ever.
Well, in terms of the potency of this issue, the people of Florida will have the opportunity to vote on this now in November. Can you talk about what the polling suggests in terms of codifying abortion rights in the state?
Yeah, time and time, I've seen several polls that suggest that close to 70% of Floridians support a woman's access to reproductive health care. And so we believe that with the efforts of the coalition that has been working so hard to make sure that voters are informed, that they understand what's at stake in November, to make sure that they come out and vote for this ballot amendment, that it will pass. And so I'm feeling very optimistic that we will show the country, Brian, that Florida is not who these extremists want people to believe. They don't represent our values. We are an independent state. We're a bright purple state, and we will show everyone in November.
Well, how do you persuade Floridians to both support this referendum and also the candidacy of the Democrats who espouse support for these policies? Because there is a world in which voters might view this as an out.
Yeah, this is not a regular election cycle. I think that most Floridians here understand. And I can tell you, as a Latina immigrant who came here from Ecuador when I was 14, many of us understand what it looks like to have politicians or the government interfere in your everyday life and in decisions that are as private as having access to reproductive health care. And so I've been very clear from the very beginning that I am someone who's a mom who has 2 daughters, a son. I'm going to make it very clear that I am going to prioritize protecting a woman's right to choose. This is a matter of fundamental civil right for women. It's also a safety issue, and it's an economic issue for many families across the state. So by November, people will know who will be on their side and who's not. And it's definitely not Rick Scott.
What lessons can we take from Ohio, for example, when both abortion and marijuana legalization are on the ballot?
That voters are smart, Brian, and it really doesn't matter that a lot of these issues are not partisan issues. People are paying attention, and they know who is trying to roll us back more than 50 years. There was a woman who was talking just this morning to one of the news reporters saying, why are we in 2024 talking about something that was enshrined into law over 50 years ago? Why are they trying to roll back protections? We come here to the United States to live in a country where democracy stands, where law and order stands, where democratic institutions protect freedoms here in America. And Floridians are very, very smart. They know that extremists in Tallahassee have been trying to take over our state. And because we are going to make sure that every voter across the state is informed, we will see the same results like we've seen in Ohio, like we saw in Kentucky, what we saw in Alabama just recently. Voters are coming out. They're going to vote for their rights, their freedoms, and they're going to make sure that we win the Senate race.
Can you talk about the difference in terms of what would happen if, for example, Republicans took the Senate and Senator Rick Scott stayed in the Senate in terms of the likelihood of a nationwide ban on abortion passing?
Well, Rick Scott is an opportunist. For him, it's always been about self-gain and self-enrichment. And so he's going to do everything in his power to make sure that he gets reelected because he wants to be Senate leader, Senate majority leader. And so he will be the first to make sure that he puts on the Senate floor for a vote a push for a national abortion ban. And so I say it won't matter if we vote to pass this amendment here in Florida and protect it in the state constitution if Rick Scott pushes a national abortion ban at the federal level. And let me just say this one last thing. They're not going to stop in just banning abortion. They want to prevent women from having access to contraception. They want to prevent families from having access to IVF. Rick Scott has been siding with extremists that have signed on to the Life at Conception bill. I saw it when I was in Congress, and that is why I want everyone listening, Brian, to go to Debbie for Florida right now, support my race. Rick Scott self-funds because he oversaw the largest Medicare fraud in the history of this country, and he used that money to buy his Senate seat. We cannot allow him to do that again in 2024.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in terms of focusing not just on passing this amendment because it'll obviously have major impacts just in that state, but also making sure that Rick Scott doesn't go back to the U.S. Senate because that will have major impacts in terms of Republicans being able to push a nationwide ban on abortion. So this is basically a two-track push that Florida is just kind of being able to spearhead right now.
Yeah, and what I always say also is that it hasn't just been abortion that he's been extreme in Washington. I mean, he has been the poster child on trying to pass Trump's agenda, and he's been blocking aid to Israel. He's been blocking aid to Ukraine. He wants to sunset Medicare and Social Security. He wants to raise taxes on middle-class families. And so it's extremely dangerous to send Rick Scott back to the Senate, especially with his ambitions on trying to beat Senate Majority Leader, which won't happen because Democrats will keep the Senate.
There are folks watching who say, why invest in Florida? We've been consistently disappointed by the state. So how is your campaign going to be different?
Look, Brian, everything about this race is different. Rick Scott is extremely vulnerable. We've seen poll after poll. He cannot pass like a 36% favorability. And I have seen two polls now that have me ahead of Rick Scott after voters know who I am. My story is the story of Floridians across the state. I came here when I was 14. I started working at a minimum wage job. And because of the American dream, because of the opportunities that I was able to obtain here, I was associate dean at the medical school at FIU. And then I was elected to be the first South American immigrant to ever be elected to the U.S. House. I've been communicating with our communities for so long in Spanish, in English, and so many people relate to the story of just trying to have economic opportunities to make it. And that's what makes my race completely different. And Rick Scott is extremely vulnerable. And you can't ignore Florida. We're 20 million Americans fighting for our rights and our freedoms. We need everyone with us.
You'd spoken about your Latino background. Democrats are obviously going in the wrong direction in terms of garnering support from the Latino community. So what is your campaign doing moving forward in terms of kind of pulling that support back?
Well, I've been present, like I said, for many years, not just now that I'm running for Senate. I've been speaking directly on Spanish radio, Spanish TV, on issues that are important to Latinos. It's not just reproductive health care, which, by the way, Latinos and Latina women understand what it's like to have government interfere in these decisions. In Mexico, in Colombia, in Argentina, very conservative countries, they passed abortion laws to protect women to have abortions. Why? Because it had a direct link with violence against women. We saw high rates of maternal mortality. And after that, we started seeing that maternal mortality rate started going down. And that's why Latinos understand these issues very, very well, but we have to speak to them directly and be where they're at. And that's what I've been doing. And so still in Florida, 2-1, Latinos vote for Democrats. They're going to do so again. And I'm feeling very, very optimistic because we're building a very strong grassroots movement all over the state.
What about taking a 30,000-foot view and stepping out of Florida for a moment? What about Latinos around the country? What's your best advice to campaigns looking to garner more support from Latinos who, again, are moving in the wrong direction?
You have to be present. You have to show up. Why would anyone, not just Latinos, but Black voters, white voters, why would anyone vote for someone that they don't know, that they can't trust, that they haven't heard from? And I think that that's critical for anyone running a race here in Florida or across the country. But let me just say one more thing, Brian. Latinos have been targeted with very, very dangerous disinformation. And it started happening back in 2020. And this comes from Russia. And what I've been seeing some of these Republicans, including Rick Scott, is pandering into this disinformation by continuing to spread lies. And so many Latinos have been very confused. But the reality is that right now they're starting to wake up. We're putting a lot of good information in front of them. And that's going to be key in the November 2024 election.
And finally, how can we support your campaign?
Go to debbieforflorida.com, make a contribution, tell your friends and family. We are going to win in November. I want everyone paying attention because this is the race that will make sure that we keep the Senate majority for Democrats so that we can continue to do the work, which is protecting democracy, protecting voting rights, protecting a woman's right to choose, and so many other things that are critical to our livelihoods in Florida and across the country.
And just to echo what you just said, I mean, we've seen these results in what would otherwise be considered red states like Kansas, like Virginia, like Ohio, where when abortion is on the ballot, Democrats win. So we do have a massive opportunity here. So again, I'll put that link right in the show notes of this episode, as well as the post description for the YouTube video. Thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.